Good morning and thank you for joining us for our webinar Wednesday session for May 2018. Today's session we are looking at BIM and the digitisation of the built environment. My name is Katie DiStefano, look after all the digital communications here at CABE, and I'll be acting as your moderator for this morning's session. If you want to get in touch with us, we do like a nice interactive webinar, so you can send any questions over to us, either on the right-hand side of the screen or at the top, depending on the device you're using to view this session. There will be a little questions box. What you need to do, if you've got any questions, just type those in. They'll pop up on the screen and we'll collate the questions and we'll answer those towards the end of the session. If you're watching this webinar perhaps on our YouTube channel or on any other catch-up means, then you can still send us over questions. Pop them to info@cbuilde.com and we'll pick those up and we will answer those in due course. If you're on Twitter, hashtag CABECPD. So your presenter this morning, it's Kieran Parkinson, and Kieran is Standards Market Development Manager at the Built Environment BSI. Now, Kieran has over 15 years experience in developing UK, European and international standards at BSI in its role as the national standards body, and most of which have been focused on the built environment. He's been involved in numerous standards programmes for buildings and infrastructure, covering construction projects, structural design, energy efficiency, flooding and BIM. So what I will do is, if you give me 2 seconds, I will hand over to Kieran and he will take you through this morning's session.
Okay, right. So thank you very much for that, Katie. As Katie said, my name's Kieran Parkinson. I'm a Market Development Manager at BSI, and today I will be talking about BIM and the digital transformation of the built environment. So a quick overview of today's this morning's session. So I'll be starting off talking about BSI and our role as the UK's national standards body, giving a very quick overview of how standards are actually developed, and then talk about the UK approach to BIM, both from a policy and sort of implementation level, and then going through some of the key BIM standards one by one to provide an overview of what they do. I'll then also talk about the international standards program related to building information modeling, and then do a little bit of a future bit talking about the integration of building information modeling with Internet of Things and smart cities standardization. Right, please bear with me whilst my computer boots up. So, BSI, who are we? Well, we shape standards for businesses and consumers, and we are the UK's national standards body. We're a private sector organisation with national standards operations that meet a public interest, and we have a royal charter that outlines our role. And we have been appointed by UK government as the national standards body and have a memorandum of understanding with the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy to this effect. So what do we do? Well, we're all about stakeholder involvement and understanding the needs of UK PLC and everybody that's involved within the sectors. So it's all about committee-led standards making. And our key principle is the principle of public consultation. We also have an awful lot of engagement and a huge network through our consumer network and the British Standards Society to make sure that our standards fulfil a wider societal need. And also a key element of our national standards body's role is the international perspective. So as the UK national standards body, we provide input into the international standards bodies ISO, IEC, CEN and CENELEC. We're also part of a larger group of businesses which also do a little bit of assurance and certification work and training, and BSI is the owner of the Kite Mark trademark. So this is an overview of our group structure. So we are a Royal Charter company, and the business is effectively split in two. On the left-hand side, you can see that we have the National Standards Body element where I sit and work, which is all around policy engagement, and we develop standards through our committees, and we provide information solutions through our various platforms to provide that knowledge, those standards to the market. On the other side of our business, we have assessment and certification programs training, advisory services, and compliance support. We treat, so I work in the national standards body part of the organisation. We treat the other part of the business on the right-hand side as a separate entity as we would anybody else in the market. So a quick overview of the international and European standards bodies. So who are they? So starting internationally, we have ISO, which is the International Organization for Standardization. And it currently has 164 national standards bodies members globally. There is one national standards body nominated in each country. We're also a member of IEC, which is the electrotechnical equivalent of ISO, and that has about 80 members of national committees as well as 80 affiliates. We're also a member of the ITU, the International Telecommunications Union, and we work very closely with the Department for Culture, Media and Sport to ensure that all standards activities in that group align with everything else that we work with at the ISO and IEC level. In Europe, BSI provides on behalf of the UK input into the European Committee for Standardisation, CEN, and its electrotechnical equivalent, CENELEC. There are 34 countries in those European bodies, 28 of which are EU, 3 of which are EFTA, European Free Trade Association companies, as well as some that are on the route to becoming members of the EU. We're also a member of the European Telecommunications Standards Institute, ETSI, and provide input into that group, working with government and industry to make sure standards developed in that space align with all the activities of CEN and CENELEC, and more globally with ISO and IEC and ITU. And the fundamental principle for all of this is to ensure that we adhere to a single standards model, that only one standard exists to help do a thing in the sector. So there isn't a divergent standardization happening across multiple territories. So as the national standards body, it's quite a large undertaking, and here are some numbers that highlight the kind of scale of the operation that we do to perform that function. So we have a number of employees, about 340, sat here in Chiswick in West London, working on standards development activities. But I think the key numbers here for us really are the network and the experts, in other words, you guys, who help drive the standardization activities. So our committee members are our lifeblood, and we have over 11,000 of those working across over 1,200 technical and subcommittees doing standardization work for us, developing British standards, European standards and international standards. At any one time, we might have about 7,000 projects on the go, standards projects, and on average, we publish about 2,500 standards a year, but we also withdraw about 1,500 standards. That makes sure that we maintain a coherent and consistent, non-conflicting body of knowledge, and make sure that you guys don't have too many standards in the space that you have to operate with when doing your roles. BSI also holds a number of international and European secretariats, which gives us the ability to be able to lead international standardization activities on behalf of the UK. And I think it's quite interesting to note that most British standards in the UK are actually adoptions of international and European standards, around 95% of our catalogue. So a quick run through the evolution of standards. So we started off in 1901 and very much were focused on product specification standards. So the most common types of standards were construction standards, steel specifications, consumer electrical products and personal safety equipment. Then in about the 1950s, we started working very closely with European and international partners to take UK best practice globally, looking at process standards. So some very key highlights there are our quality management system, ISO 9001, which was a British standard taken through to ISO, and our environmental management standard, ISO 14001. There have been a number of other standards published. Most recently, we have taken the health and safety standard internationally to become ISO. So it was in the UK, it was called OSAS 18000, and internationally has just been recently published as an international standard. So we're also now looking at standards which are talking about organizational potential and how we might be able to deliver organizational potential within the UK. So the standards that sort of meet this need are anti-bribery standards, social responsibility standards, and standards around collaborative business relationships. So I often get asked about how do standards relate to each other and where do they fit. So this slide is something we like to use to describe where we as the national standards body see standards fitting with what you guys use within your own organizations or your own trade associations or your own sectors. So it's all about improving best practice through standardization. So at the bottom in the blue area we have what we would call private and professional standards, codes and guidance, which might be things that are used within your own companies or within your own trade associations to help you discharge your services. These would normally be only available to your own your own communities to use, and will be run through your own processes and procedures to maintain them and disseminate them. So BSI starts getting involved when we develop British standards and publicly available specifications, which are open standards which get all stakeholders that might have a potential interest in a document or a standard around the table to discuss what that should look like, and then develop what is the appropriate code of practice or specification or methodology that should be applied for the whole of the UK to use, and is then made available for everyone to have access to. We then provide UK input into European standards and international standards, and we can take British standards and PASs to European standards bodies and international standards bodies and use those as the basis for developing international and European standards. And we have done that in the building information modelling space, which I'll be talking about later. This is a good way to describe how we might be able to take UK thought leadership developed in the UK quite quickly and then to establish it as international practice and enable UK PLC to trade globally more easily. So the key highlights are standards are made by people for people. As I said, we publish a number of standards per year, but we also withdraw a number of standards, and our key role is to make sure that we're maintaining a consistent, coherent body of knowledge for the entire sector. BSI is not actually an industry expert in any of the areas that we work, but we are a neutral facilitator for industry experts, and we provide independence in that process. So for BSI, standards are consensus of what good looks like. I often get asked about why do we need standards, and why do we need standards certainly in new areas such as building information modelling, and how can it help support innovation? So this slide we put together to try and explain about the number of standards that we've produced in the last few years, which help to identify how we've been able to scale up industries and get people to actually have confidence in investing in a way of an approach to doing something. So I think the key things about standards are that they are a channel to build public and investor confidence in new technologies and products, and there are no IP barriers or risk of technology lock-in if you use open, publicly available standards. I think a third piece would be about the fact that we can actually produce, we can achieve UK leadership globally through our network as a national standards body. So how do we make standards? So apologies for this quite busy slide, but this, in summary, is exactly how we do it. We start off with an idea that might come from anybody, either the sector or from government or from anybody. We have actually in the past received on average about 300 ideas for standards every month, which we have to sift through and work with our committees to establish if there is a need for a standard. Once those ideas are assessed with the committees, and we'll put that out to public consultation and see if people think this is a good idea. If the project is actually approved, if a standard is needed and agree that there is a need for one, we will then create a project and start drafting a standard, working with our technical committees to make that happen. Once the draft is mature, it'll be available for public inquiry. So that on the bottom right-hand corner, there is another element of public involvement there, where people are able to, for a period of 2 months, review the document clause by clause and identify and query anything that they have, anything they'd like to find out a little bit more information about, or query the veracity of the information in the standard and share it with us. So once we receive all these comments at the end of the consultation period, the committee considers all those comments and responds to each and every single one, and then it produces an updated draft based on those comments, incorporating changes where it's been decided to incorporate those changes, and then puts it out for final approval to be published, which again is it goes out for public consultation through our committees. But the journey doesn't just end there when we publish the standard once it's approved. We then have to maintain that standard. We have to make sure that it's still relevant. So every 5 years, we, as a minimum, once every 5 years, we review every single standard in our portfolio with our committees. And we effectively determine whether or not it needs to be withdrawn, confirmed, or reconfirmed, amended, or revised. So I've talked about our technical committees, who are our lifeblood of the work that we do. And so what does a typical technical committee look like? So here is an example of that. We have a set of rules and procedures and processes for how we actually run our committees, and the rules by which they should abide, and the structure by which standards should be written. And in there it defines the role of a chairman and a secretary. Secretary is normally provided by BSI. A chairman is an industry expert who is independent and facilitates the other industry experts to develop a consensus of what good looks like. Typical representatives on technical committees, and I'm going to use the word representatives there to demonstrate that they should be representative of stakeholder groups, not individual interests. So we'd have consumer bodies, standards users, professional institutions or research organizations, trade associations and unions, education and academia. We have a lot of engagement from government departments, of course, and we would also have enforcement and certification bodies in there too. So now I'm going to give a quick overview of the built environment standards landscape before going into specifically building information modeling. So within the built environment here at BSI, in the team that I work in, we've categorized the majority of our standards portfolio into these key themes. So we have energy performance of buildings, asset facilities management, fire, infrastructure, construction products, sustainable construction, structural Eurocodes, and smart cities, and of course building information modeling. And specifically around building information modeling, there is a much wider agenda connected with other initiatives which are related, such as digital transformation initiatives, I should say, such as Internet of Things, geospatial information systems, the concept of smart infrastructure and smart assets, off-site construction and design for manufacture and assembly, for example, and of course the risks associated with cybersecurity in a digital world. So the UK approach to BIM. Well, this started off in 2011 with the coalition government's, at that time, coalition government's BIM strategy, which was announced by Francis Maude. He announced a 4-year strategy for the BIM implementation to effectively try and change the dynamics and behaviours of the construction supply chain and, importantly, unlock new, more efficient and collaborative ways of working. This was outlined in the Government Construction Strategy Report in 2011, which also set out a number of targets which BIM would hopefully be a part of an enabling factor in delivering against these. So some of those, and these key targets still stand and are still applicable. So by 2025, the goal was to lower costs by 33%, to deliver projects faster by up to 50%, reduction in overall time, to reduce emissions by 50%, and to improve exports by 50%. So in a nutshell, what is BIM? Well, BIM is, of course, building information modeling is a multi-dimensional digital tool. From a BSI perspective and from a standards perspective, it is actually about establishing an information management process that enables the adoption of digital technologies such as building information modeling tools. The BIM model is a visual model that manages asset data from inception to demolition. and it is all about creating a collaborative 3D model, the creation, the gathering and exchange of data to all parties. So in the UK, starting back in 2007 with our first BIM standard, BS 1192, which outlined the principles of building information modelling from a standards perspective, we started working with government and with our experts on developing a maturity model. This maturity model has 4 levels, and it was agreed, and this infographic here, which is contained within our standards, identifies what those different levels are and what they mean. But in short, level 0 is an unmanaged computer-aided design environment. Level 1 is a managed computer-aided design environment in either 2 or 3D. In level 2 BIM, it's a managed collaborative 3D environment, and importantly, this was required. This level, BIM level 2, was required in all public sector asset procurement by April 2016. The maturity model also has a level 3 in there, which it defines as fully open process and data integration, or in other words, integrated BIM. Level 3 BIM is now set out in the Digital Built Britain strategy and will be taken forward by the Centre for Digital Built Britain in Cambridge. In essence, BIM level 3 is all about capturing the inherent value in our built assets and also the data to help create a digital and smart city economy. So what did we do about BIM? We're working with government. Well, first of all, we created the standards with them. We're working with industry and with government to develop the standards that would help industry adopt BIM. And we produced a website, which is the official BIM level 2 home, providing all the standards available for free to download, and also providing guidance which is aimed at the UK and international markets. The intention is to have some of those guidance documents translated into a number of different languages, but I think it's probably quite important to note that since 2013, when the documents were first produced, there's been over 145,000 copies of the standards in total downloaded, 20% of which have been outside of the UK. This has become a truly global phenomenon in terms of developing UK standards which are adopted globally. So our standards are being utilised all over the globe, for example, in the United Arab Emirates, in Dubai, in Australia, Germany, Netherlands, Belgium, Spain, Romania, Russia, and Chile, to name a few. So what are the BIM standards and what do they look like? And the other tools as part of BIM level 2. So relevant documents are, I'll start in the top left-hand corner with BS 1192, which was updated in 2016, which is a principles document. And then Part 2, PAS 1192 Part 2, which focuses on project delivery. PAS 1192 Part 3, which focuses on asset management. BS 1192 Part 4, which focuses on data exchange and how that information is changed between the different stages during the asset lifecycle. And then, very importantly, PAS 1192 Part 5, the security-minded approach to building information modelling and how we develop that mindset and that culture within our organisation to think about information and how we share it in a secure way. We recently published PAS 1192 Part 6, which is actually around how you manage and share health and safety information throughout the asset lifecycle. A couple of other standards worth noting are PAS 91, which is the Construction Pre-Qualification Questionnaire document, which cites PAS 1192 Part 2 as a document that can be used in order to not need to fulfill the requirements under PAS 91 for your building information modelling question, effectively. And then also BS 8536 Part 1 and Part 2, so there are 2 standards there, which is all around the handover of information from design and construction through to asset management. And Parts 1 and 2 focus on buildings and infrastructure separately. It's worth noting that government also has nominated 3 other tools to help support industry with the adoption of BIM. The first one on the right-hand side, bottom right-hand side, is the BIM protocol. which effectively outlines intellectual property and copyright issues, and is a contractual document that should be used when specifying BIM. They also established a classification system for BIM called Uniclass, and they also established something called the Digital Plan of Works, which is effectively a stage approach to the asset lifecycle by which information should be managed and shared. So very at a high level, what is BIM? It's a framework for collaboration. It defines a set of processes. Our standards define a set of processes for the production, management, and exchange of information generated in the design, construction, and management phase of an asset. The fundamental principle is start with the end in mind. So at the start of a project, it must be defined for every stage of the project what information is required, to what level of detail must the information have, who is responsible for managing that information, who is responsible for producing the information, how should the information be used, when is the information required, in what format must the information be, and how should the information be named, and how should the information be exchanged. So in other words, how should all of this information also be managed as well? But it's more than just simply 3D models. So at the very bottom you have data, which are just facts and figures which relate something but are not organized and structured and contextualized. You have information, which is arranged, analyzed and contextualized data, something that you might be able to do something with. But what we want to achieve with BIM is knowledge, know-how, understanding, experience and insight. We want to make sure that we're providing data to help us produce some information and hopefully improve our knowledge. So I'm going to take you now very quickly through 5 of the key standards within the BIM Level 2 suite, starting off with BS 1192. So it is applicable across the whole life of the asset, design, construction and asset management, and effectively establishes the methodology for managing the production, distribution and quality of construction information. It defines a key principle, which is the framework for the common data environment. And it also defines a set of standard methods and procedures to be adopted for all information generated within the life cycle of a project. So the standards, methods and procedures that it defines cover the way the information is named, expressed and referenced. So each organization involved must adopt the project SMP, standard method and procedures, and all relevant parties, clients, design consultants, supply chain partners, asset managers, facilities managers, they must all agree and commit to using it. And in order to implement the SMP, the following 8 principles should be followed. You have your roles and responsibilities and authorities, the CDE approach and the document repository approach, your document management system and your electronic data management information hierarchy, your file naming convention, the origin and setting out of coordination systems and spatial coordination, your drawing sheet templates, the layer standard classification system, e.g. Uniclass, and annotation, so abbreviations, text, dimension, symbols, model and scale. Once those 8 principles are agreed and everybody in the project uses them, it enables the process to be much more fluid. So looking very much now at PAS 1192 Part 2. This covers the design and construction phase of the asset lifecycle, and it specifies requirements for achieving BIM Level 2 around creating a managed and collaborative 3D BIM environment. The PAS is a set of procedures that follow a construction project across the information delivery lifecycle, which is established within the document. It makes recommendations for the adoption of industry conventions, which would basically allow people to collectively further improve industry efficiency. So some of those recommendations include classification systems, job roles and hierarchy, naming conventions, a level model definition, and plans of work. PAS 1192 Part 3 very much is focused on the asset management aspect of the life cycle of the asset. So it deals with the production and management of information of an asset within the in-use phase of its life. It is envisaged that in this phase, the vast majority of savings for a BIM-led project are going to be made. And for any BIM project, due to the length of this phase, 20 plus years. Looking at data exchange, BS 1192 Part 4, the COBE document. What is COBE? Construction Operations Building Information and Exchange is a formal schema that helps organize information about new and existing facilities. It effectively is a means of transferring information on maintainable assets in a predefined and structured way. It enables the sender of information to be able to organize in a very structured way information so that when the recipient receives it, they know exactly what they're receiving and they can dedupe against it to make sure that if there's anything that they miss or they want to get on top of or go back to find out information about, it's easy for them to do so. It can be used for buildings and infrastructure and is usually transmitted using a spreadsheet. The aim of COBE is that each incremental information exchange increases in completeness and is then used to transfer data to the in-use stages of a facility. COBE holds information about the spatial location, the equipment, and components that make up the facility. And the last key document I'll be looking at is PAS 1192 Part 5. Which specifies requirements for security-minded management of BIM and digital built environments. It outlines the cybersecurity vulnerabilities to hostile attack when using BIM and establishes a triage process for assessing an assessment process effectively to determine the levels of cybersecurity for BIM collaboration that should be applied during all phases of the site and building lifecycle. It's applicable to the design, delivery, and operation of built assets where asset information is created, stored, and processed and viewed in a digital form. On the left-hand side is a very simple view of the triage process that is outlined within PAS 1102 Part 5, which establishes the role of a built asset security manager. So how do they all fit together? So here we have a view of the whole life asset, starting from briefing all the way down to decommissioning. So we talked earlier on about PAS 91, the pre-qualification document, which very much establishes what you need to be doing in order to tender for work, for example, on government projects, and identifies the need for PAS 1192 Part 2 to be used to demonstrate compliance against BIM requirements. And then we have PAS 1192 Part 2, which is very much focused on the CapEx aspect of the life cycle of assets, covering all the way from briefing, design through to construction. We then have 1192 Part 3, which is focusing on the operational aspects of the in-use phase of the asset. This is all underpinned by the common data environment and the standards, methods and procedures outlined within BS 1192, the principles document. 1192 Part 4, BS 1192 Part 4 is around the Common Data Exchange format, COBE. And BS 8536 Part 1 and Part 2 establishes best practice for handover of information from the construction aspect of the life cycle of the asset to the in-use aspect of the asset life cycle. And as a wrapper around all of this are two documents now, PAS 1192 Part 5 Security, which establishes the mindset for how to take a secure approach to managing your digital information across the whole life of the asset, as well as PAS 1192 Part 6, which focuses on managing health and safety information across the whole life of an asset. So I'm going to take you through now the international arena and what we're doing there as your national standards body. So at the very bottom, we have the UK National Committee, which is B555, Construction Design, Modelling and Data Exchange. This committee coordinates UK input into relevant European and international committee work. It will adopt the European and international standards as British standards, and it will also develop its own British standards and provides input into the development of publicly available specifications. It is this committee in which all the BIM standards will run through. Looking at then moving to the top and talking about international standards, the relevant committee there is ISO TC 59SC13, Construction Works Information. The UK, the BSI, on behalf of the UK, took a number of the UK BIM standards to that international committee, and through that committee has led the conversion of the UK documents into international standards. And that the first of those will be published later this year. So ISO 19650 Part 1 and ISO 19650 Part 2, which are based on BS 1192 and PAS 1192 Part 2, are due in November 2018. In the pipeline are two other documents which are of interest here. So ISO 19650 Part 3, which looks at the operational phase of assets and is based on PAS 1192 Part 3, is due in April 2020. And ISO 19650 Part 5, which is security-minded building information modeling, is based on our PAS 1192 Part 5, is also due in April 2020. BSI, on behalf of the UK, continues to work with industry to make sure that those documents are going to fit as well as possible with the UK standards when they get published. So now looking at the European Committee in the middle, which is CEN-TC 442 Building Information Modeling. Now this committee is at present adopting all of the international standards that are being produced by ISO TC 59SC13 as European standards through something called a Vienna Agreement. And this is something that BSI has been, as the UK NSB, has been working with industry to ensure happens, so that we don't have divergent European standardization happening with global standardization. So it will be adopting all of those standards I talked about previously at ISO as European standards. It also develops European standards to complement any ISO and international work if they aren't being developed internationally. And some areas that it has at the moment that a lot of focus on is around product data templates, data dictionaries, and smart CE marking. A CEN Workshop Agreement report, which is a technical report, was recently published on smart CE marking. So what does the future hold then for standardization within the digital and built environment? So there are a number of things that are actually going on. For example, I mentioned earlier the Centre for Digital Built Britain and its focus on BIM Level 3. And it has a multi-year program at which it will be establishing the next steps for how we then adopt best practice within the UK for a digital built environment. One of the areas that is being talked about a lot, not just within Centre for Digital Built Britain, but elsewhere as well, the wider market, is around the creation of smart buildings and smart assets, and how can we enable that to happen. BSI has been working not just within the built environment, but within a number of other sectors, including our Internet of Things sector, and produced a standard PAS 212, which enables Internet of Things devices to be searchable and findable by each other and talk to each other, to enable an environment in which smart buildings and smart assets might be able to operate. And this is an open standard available to everybody to adopt. This infographic identifies some of the things that might be possible in a future smart building world and smart asset world, but obviously will require a significant amount of technology to be able to, and standardization with that technology to make sure it happens in a non-proprietary manner. And that is what BSI's current focus is on, is how can we enable a non-proprietary smart asset world to be developed. So what are the barriers to achieving maturity in a smart buildings and smart asset world? So this infographic just shows very simply some work that we've been doing in a few workshops to show a hierarchy of how we see the built environment and assets within that working. So assets in general are all buildings and infrastructure. And assets that currently you would call as being smart assets would be those that are utilizing building management systems, which tend to be fairly varying degrees of interoperability and maybe not as well connected and maintainable and open to other technology sources as they could be to enable true smart buildings and smart infrastructure. Connected smart assets would be the next step down from individual smart assets, which is where a group of smart assets are able to use IoT solutions to share data with each other and actuate and utilize that data to improve optimal performance of those assets and perhaps the services that they're delivering. And then finally, we have at the very core of that is the idea of connected cities, which is the integration of various connected smart assets and smart communities of assets with other city systems to ensure the improved and optimal use of the urban environment. I think it's probably important to mention is that it is envisaged in the future that we'll continue to grow and the amount of people living within urban environments in the future will continue to exponentially increase, and so the pressure on those urban environments and those services and infrastructure within those environments is going to increase as well. And so being able to optimize the use of those assets and the infrastructure within urban environments and improve the way they're designed is going to be one of the key focuses, I think, for the activities of organizations such as the Centre of Digital Britain. So, talking about cities, BSI has been doing an awful lot of work around development of smart city standards, which have been providing good practice for city leaders on how to even produce a vision for a smart city and a roadmap for how to deliver it. So these open public standards allow the development of replicable solutions, and they increase confidence in procurement of infrastructure and services. So this is broadly speaking the roadmap or the roadmap for the smart cities standards suite. Starting at the very top with a vision, goals, and strategy approach, looking at how assessing those capabilities and the gap analysis. Being able to measure performance is going to be a key element of activities at a smart city level. And then off the back of that, developing and implementing a roadmap of activities to enable that smart city environment to grow and improve. And then off that, you'll have your enabling capabilities and your service transformation as a result of that. And to enable that vision, BSI has produced a number of standards, which are all available for free on BSI's website, that start at the very strategic level and move down to very much a data concept model and data operability level with PAS 182. More recently, we have produced standards around smart city data security, so PAS 185, which builds on the work of PAS 1192 Part 5, the BIM security-minded approach document, to try and ensure that the security aspects within a digital environment within cities are considered, because obviously the implications there could be quite significant. These standards are very much aimed at the strategic level within cities. So, what does the future hold as far as we're concerned with the standards programs that we think are probably most relevant? So we think that with BIM, we've established a maintained data sets environment through the BIM standards, which will spit out, as I said, maintained data sets. If we connect that with Internet of Things devices to enable real-time data collection and add that to the maintained data sets contained within asset information models, and then we also improve the interfaces with assets, so the asset insight and control systems, building management systems, maybe apps and users themselves, we might be able to produce a system in which, a platform, I should say, which will enable smart assets and smart buildings to be better operated and used, and to enable a city portfolio view of those smart assets and smart infrastructure. And of course, on top of that, with all this additional information that might be available, we'd need to be thinking about the enterprise and asset management systems required to enable this to happen, the amount of data that's going to be coming out of it, and how we're going to be able to manage that data as well as analyze it to get optimal use. And so we're looking at integrating the BIM standards with the Internet of Things standards we've produced and the smart asset standards, and establishing if there is anything we can work on in the future to try and make those three things integrate better from a standards point of view to allow industry to be able to deliver smart assets and smart infrastructure. And that concludes my run-through of BIM standards.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Kieran. Thank you for the expertise this morning. I do have some questions that have come in, so I'm going to be putting you on the spot now.
Okay.
The first one actually is less of a question and more of a comment regarding the UK being the market leader in technical safety standards, and saying about how, you did reference it, but how that other countries are actually using the UK's guidance documents for looking for cutting edge and best practice. And the comment is kind of, BSI should be reinforcing this point in the current political climate. What are your thoughts on that? Should be reinforcing the point that the standards are being used globally? Yes, and the fact that we are seen as a leader. I think we could be doing more in lots of ways, if I'm honest, around spreading the message of BIM and the impact that it's having. I think that it's a good point that we could be doing more to make that point within the UK, but also globally, that the standards are being well used. That the challenge is that we are with our infrastructure here within BSI, we are working with government closely to make sure that they are aware of this. But with the people we're speaking with, they certainly do realise that it's highly impactful. But I think it's also, we need industry to be the advocate for it as well, to take our message, which we're giving today, for example, around the success of these standards, and also give that message to government and to other industry sectors. Because at the moment, it's sort of, if you want to listen to it and say, yes, I agree that this is definitely working, then you're already converted. But there are others out there who they aren't listening as well, or they're not really as as easily. They've got other agendas, shall I say? I'm probably being a little bit too political there with a big P. So does that answer the question? I think it does, thank you. And now, just moving on, I've got a question here. Are the requirements of building regulations and the approved documents included in BIM? Sorry, could you repeat that, Katie? Sorry. It just says, are the requirements of building regulations and the approved documents included in BIM? Ah, right. No. So the standards, all standards are voluntary. So none of the requirements contained with any of the building regulations or the approved documents are contained in any standards that BSI produces. However, those documents, the approved documents in particular, do cite a number of British standards as being a method of demonstrating compliance, the best method for demonstrating compliance to meet those technical requirements contained within the approved documents. So just the short answer is no, the BIM standards, as the same with all other standards that we produce, do not actually cite any of the legal requirements contained within the building regulations, but they have been designed to help demonstrate compliance to some of those regulations by working with industry and government. And where government are happy that they do that, they're happy to cite them in the approved documents. If the question is also then going to be, just to build on that, is there envisioned in the future that they will incorporate more, will the BIM standards be cited within the approved documents? I have absolutely no idea if that will be the case, but I'm fairly sure, given the current climate around things such as the Hackett Review and Grenfell, that there obviously is going to be some work to update the approved documents, and we'll just have to wait and see what happens when that review process is completed. Excellent. Kind of following on from that, we have actually got a question regarding new standards and what is being developed in response to the Grenfell Tower fire, but is there anything you can answer on that? On the specifically, I think
we're still digesting the outcome from the Hackett review. I mean, it's a very interesting document, and it does highlight a number of things, including the fact that something like BIM might be a solution moving forward for solving the problem of information sharing and information exchange and being able to better manage our assets. There's nothing I can say around specific changes to any standards that might be happening as a result of the Hackett review, though. And I think all I can say is we'll just working with government and industry over the coming 12 months. I'm sure there will be some work happening as a result of it, but I can't give anything more specific than that.
No, sure. I appreciate putting you on the spot about that one. Martin has asked, with the introduction of ISO 19650 in November, will PAS 1192 be withdrawn?
Good question. We're still discussing exactly how that transition process will happen from the PASs to the ISOs. My feeling would be that the document will probably be, well, will probably be withdrawn, yes, and that will probably end up with a national annex being developed, which by the UK, which will be appended to the back of the international standard to enable users of that international standard to understand how it related to the PAS that the UK has obviously been using for the last few years. That decision, though, has still to be taken. But I would suggest it's a likely scenario. Does that answer the question?
It does, I believe. Martin, does it answer your question? While we're talking internationally, I have a question. How will the transition from UK BIM standards to the international ISO standards be managed?
You're right. So yeah, so we will be likely producing a national annex, which is an informative guidance document which we can develop at the UK level and put on the back of any of the European or international standards to help provide commentary on how to use that document in the UK market. It's got to be something that can't conflict with the document, so any of the body of the content, and so hence it being informative in nature. It is just a guidance document, as it were, that sits on the back of the ISO. But in this case, it's going to be very much a vehicle for helping industry understand how the ISO related to the PAS that they've been used to using for a few years. And we envisage that process happening not just for 1192, but for Part 2, but for all of the BS and PASs, British Standards and PASs, that have been elevated to ISO to become international standards. I think one other thing I will add actually is that there's a possibility that we might be producing some guidance to support that transition as well. But again, we're still in discussions within our committees about the best approach to do that.
Okay, great. Again, whilst we're talking international, John's asking, what do you think the impact of Brexit will be on all of the on the standards?
Well, it's BSI's stated ambition, and I probably should have said actually in the slide deck that we have a whole section on our website dedicated to this, which John, if you Google it, you'll be able to find it very easily because it's very high profile, obviously. But it's our ambition and it's our expectation that we will remain a member of CEN, the European standards body, and will continue to adopt all European standards the way we do at the moment, and that we will continue to provide a leading role in development of European standards and give the UK a voice in the development of those documents. So I basically expect there to be very little, if any, change in terms of the European standards arena. Okay,
interesting. Thank you. Got a comment here from Paul, who's and something that we talk about quite a lot is quality, but it's saying that BIM will not stop poor quality, and he's concerned that from a training manager's role that there isn't the right level or number of workers to go forward. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think BIM alone will not address the issue of poor quality, and there is a skills. There's a wider skills issue. I think it's actually a related, but it's a separate issue. So I think having better information and more timely information will help us to make better decisions on how to do things. But in order to address the sort of quality aspect of it, then we need to actually have, as the UK, an approach that sits alongside this to help upskill people and to change the skills that they currently have to focus better on the quality of the service that they provide. I think so. Yeah, I basically agree that BIM on its own will not improve quality, but it'll provide, by having better information available and more information available and more timely information available, it hopefully should give us the environment to start making better decisions and hopefully lead to an environment where we're delivering better quality services.
Okay, excellent, thank you. Just got one final question sitting here for you, and it is, how can, being asked, how can I get involved in developing standards?
Right, yeah. So I probably should have said that in my slide deck, and I didn't actually. But you can approach BSI. You can come to me. You can come to our standards development website, and actually there's an email address on there to say I'd like to get involved, or I have an idea for a standard, or I don't like a standard that you produce. We want feedback from industry, and we want involvement from industry. So I guess the best way to leave it is if you go to BSI's website and go to its standards development portal, you'll be able to see all the different ways that you can get involved with standards development, either by publicly commenting on documents that are available or by asking specific questions and asking to be involved on committees. I think that the other thing I would say is the best way to get involved on standards committees for a specific project or area that you want to get involved in is to be a member of a trade association or a professional body, and through them approach BSI to be nominated on one of our committees. That is the easiest and most easiest route for us to be able to get expertise onto our committees.
Okay, that's really interesting. And also, following that is a bit of a shout out to members that if anybody is interested in getting involved, then by all means come and speak to us, and then perhaps we can look forward at taking that forward from CABE into BSI and working together. I think that would be a great idea.
Yeah, definitely. We like that.
So that's all the questions that I've got, Kieran. Thank you very much. So what I'm going to do now, I'm conscious of time. We've reached pretty much our hour that we tend to allow. So what I'm going to do now is just let everybody know that we've got 2 more webinars for this sort of series, for the spring summer series. The next up is the 13th of June. We're looking at an overview of the Bruckle document, and then on the 18th of July we've got basement waterproofing. You'll get a link, there'll be a follow-up email coming out after this session that acknowledges your attendance, and it says you can claim an hour CPD for this morning. There'll be a link to register onto those webinars, so obviously we'd love to see you online again. But moving forward from that, I'm now looking at planning the autumn series of Webinar Wednesdays. So there's a few months up for grabs. If anybody has anything that they would either like to see covered, or any subjects that you feel that you could actually deliver a presentation on, do get in touch with me. Give me a shout, and we'd love to hear from you and work with you. So really, all it's left for me to do now is, again, thank you, Kieran. Thank you for your time, and thank everybody for joining us. And we shall see you online again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.